Welcome to Endocyte's conference call to discuss the company's first quarter 2015 financial results and operations update. Speaking today will be Mike Sherman, Chief Operating Officer and Chief Financial Officer, and Scott Harper, Vice President of Clinical Operations. At this time, all participants are in listen-only mode. Following their comments, we will open the lines for questions. Advise that today's call is being recorded and webcast. During this conference call, the company may make predictive statements concerning future events or developments. Actual results may differ materially from those indicated by forward-looking statements. Please refer to Endocyte's filings with the Securities and Exchange Commission for a discussion of risks and uncertainties impacting those results. Now, let me turn the call over to Mike Sherman.
Thanks, everyone, for joining the call. Let me start by passing on Ron's apologies as he's had some travel issues that have prevented him from getting to a good telephone connection. That said, I have Scott Harper here to give an update on the trials, and our update today will be relatively brief anyway. So let me dive right into it. I'll take make a few summary comments, pass it to Scott for an update on the clinical trials, and then I'll wrap up with some comments on the financials before we open it up for your questions. We continue to be very pleased with the progress of our dose escalation trials, both EC1456, the folate targeted tubulysin, as well as EC1169, the PSMA targeted tubulysin. As we noted in the press release, both agents are now in the 5th dosing cohort. With cohort 5 of EC1456, will be substantially above the 2.5 milligram dose, the fixed dose used in the PROCEED and TARGET trials of EC145 or ventaflide. On the weekly schedule, we're more than triple the single dose of EC145 and 80% higher than the single dose on the twice-weekly schedule. This is not entirely unexpected. As you'll recall, we advanced the chemistry of the spacer in this second-generation SMDC to limit liver clearance. So the conjugate is designed to dose at higher levels. Because PSMA is a new target for tubulysin, we started the dose escalation for EC1169 at a lower level relative to EC1456, and so far we've seen a nice safety profile for this agent as well. As we highlighted on our last call, we plan to expand both of these trials once the maximum tolerated dose is achieved. For EC1169, that will be advanced in prostate cancer patients, and for EC1456, it will be in multiple tumor types, including non-small cell lung cancer, ovarian, and triple-negative breast cancer, all targeted to patients based on the receptor positivity. We should have a steady flow of clinical updates in the coming months with these open-label trials. Of course, the efficacy updates will be more meaningful in the expansion phase as we're in targeted patients. We'll provide updates on both phase 1 trials at ASCO, and we'll present the final OS data from the target non-small cell lung cancer trial at another medical conference this year. We still expect the final target trial overall survival analysis to occur in the second quarter. Let me turn it over to Scott now for a more detailed discussion of these phase 1 trials.
Thanks, Mike. I'll start with the dose escalation trial for EC1456. As Mike mentioned, we've been able to deliver much higher doses compared to ventaflide, and we've seen early signs of efficacy even at low doses, and this efficacy is in the form of long-term stable disease and individual tumor responses. As a reminder, we're scanning patients with EC20 or etarfolitide to assess their FR status, but we're enrolling all comers regardless of their FR status. We're also evaluating 2 schedules, a once-weekly dose and a twice-weekly schedule. They're both 3-week schedules, with the 3rd week being a rest week. We're currently completing the 5th cohort for each of these schedules. That's 2.5 milligrams per meter squared for the twice-per-week schedule. That's about 4.5 milligrams per dose on average, or 9 milligrams per week, and 4.5 milligrams per meter squared for the once-per-week schedule, and that's about 8 milligrams per dose on average. Thus far, we've seen really no pattern of toxicities. The vast majority are self-limiting and low clinical grade, typically grade 1 or grade 2. We've seen one dose-limiting toxicity in cohort number 5. That was on the once-per-week schedule at 4.5 milligrams per meter squared. It was a single patient who experienced an injection reaction that we later confirmed was a hypersensitivity reaction. After treating 3 additional patients at the next lower dose of 3.5 milligrams per meter squared, we've now resumed treatment at 4.5 milligrams per meter squared per the protocol, and we have 2 additional patients at that dose, and they've been treated without consequence. Efficacy, while not an objective of the study, and of course we're not limiting enrollment to FR 100% patients as we will in the second phase of the trial. Nonetheless, 36 out of 43 evaluable lesions are folate receptor positive, and of those that reach their first scan, 80% have been stable disease or better. Should we move on to the 6th cohort, we would be at 3.5 milligrams per meter squared for the twice-per-week schedule and 6 milligrams per meter squared for the once-per-week schedule. So now moving on to EC 1169, we're also in the process of completing the 5th cohort with once per week and 3 times per week dosing schedules. They are both 3-week cycles, with the 3rd week being a rest week. As with EC 1456, we've not yet seen any patterns of toxicity. Toxicity has been quite infrequent and generally low-grade and self-limiting. Recall that we're scanning these prostate cancer patients with EC 0652, but enrolling them regardless of the scan result. Although thus far all the patients have shown positive PSMA scan results throughout their disease. So now I'll pass it back over to Mike, and then glad to answer questions in the Q&A portion of the call.
Thanks, Scott. Our financials are, again, very straightforward. Total expenses of just under $11 million were down from more than $20 million last year. Most of that decline is the result of having the PROCEED Phase 3 trial expenses behind us, and the Phase 2 target trial is also substantially complete. That spending was replaced with the Phase 1 dose escalation trials for EC 1456 and EC 1169, but of course at much lower levels. We ended the quarter with just under $197 million in cash, which reflects a reduction in cash from the end of the year of about $10 million. We expect the expense and cash burn to increase sequentially, as I've commented before, during the course of 2015, especially as we expand the trials for EC 1456 and EC 1169, likely in the second half of the year. We still expect to exit 2015 with more than $155 million in cash on hand. In the meantime, obviously look forward to keeping you updated on our progress in the clinic. So with that, let me turn it back to the operator to take your questions.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, if you have a question at this time, please press the star, then the 1 key on your touch-tone telephone. You may remove yourself from the queue at any time by pressing the pound key. Again, to ask a question at this time, please press star, then 1 on your touch-tone telephone. And our first question comes from Daniel Brims of Cantor. Please go ahead.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. I have just a question on the 80% response rate that you're seeing. Is there any dose response that you're seeing with greater responses or a larger percentage of the positive lesions responding at higher concentrations, or is it fairly uniform over all of the 5 cohorts so far?
This is Scott. Actually, it's a little too early to tell. It's a great question because dose response would be what we're looking for, although we've had relatively few lesions and relatively few dose levels. I also want to clarify that 80%, that's a lesion level response that would be stable disease, so not necessarily a clinical response.
Okay. And I guess, what if you don't reach, a maximum tolerated dose in the next few cohorts or in the next cohort, will you basically move into the dose escalation studies basically as is, or are you going to wait until you get that maximum tolerated dose?
So I think when you say move into the dose escalation, you may be talking about expansion.
Or the dose expansion, sorry.
Yeah, it's an interesting question because the drug is behaving very well, and so you either hit an MTD that you carry into the expansion phase, or theoretically, I guess you could get to a response levels that are so compelling that you could move forward before you get an MTD. I think at this point, based on how these conjugates have performed in the past, we would expect that we would ultimately hit some DLTs and around that level see activity of the agent as well. So I'm still expecting that it would be an MTD-driven move to Part 2, but what you suggested is not out of the realm of possibilities. We're probably a little too far from wanting to pull that trigger, though.
Okay. And I guess the final question is, what kind of data do you expect us to present at ASCO?
So if you saw what we presented at the posters that were presented at the Targeted Anti-Cancer Therapy Conference in Paris, we had both safety and efficacy data at a patient, and I think at even a lesion level there. So what we would likely do is update that information with the patients that have enrolled in the meantime and that have progressed on the trial in the meantime.
All right. Thank you for taking my questions.
Thanks, Dan.
Again, ladies and gentlemen, if you have a question at this time, please press star then 1 on your touchtone telephone. And I'm showing no further questions at this time. I'd like to turn it back to Mike Sherman for closing remarks.
Thanks again for everybody for joining the call. As I suggested up front, a pretty straightforward quarter as we progress through these phase 1 dose escalations. The news around the corner was an update on the Target OS data, which we've seen the interim analysis last fall. It will be good to get that under our belt as it will inform more specifically our strategy and how we move forward with 1456, particularly in lung cancer. And as I said, the nature of these trials, open label trials, particularly in the expansion phase in the second half of the year, will give us flexibility to keep you abreast of how those drugs are performing in targeted patients. So look forward to those updates, the next one being at ASCO. So hopefully see some of you there. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, this does conclude today's conference. Thank you for your attendance. You may now disconnect. Everyone, have a great day.